6 days ago, I think it was. Blur now. I was with Charlie in Korea. I was invited to go to Korea by this young Korean woman. Her name is Mina Kim. Tiny little gal, faith-filled, courageous. She's got a quadriplegic dad. She's an only child. She puts together the equivalent of Turning Point USA in Korea called Build Up Korea. And it all started because she was watching her generation and the nation she loved. The largest Christian population in Asia is in Korea. When I went to visit her, she took me to the missionary graveyard that they attribute these missionaries for codifying the Korean language and giving them an alphabet so they wouldn't be Chinese. The founders of Korea 70 years ago, over 11 of the 14 were Bible-believing Christians. The first president was a Bible-believing Christian. It was founded, it's over 20% evangelical. Largest church in the world is in Seoul, Korea, Full Gospel Church. Pastor Cho, who's gone to be with the Lord. And she came up to me. I didn't know who she was, and she flew out from Korea. And what she had done is she realized that Korea was being inundated with traditional media, MSNBC, CNN, and that's all they would allow to enter into Korea. And the communists had infiltrated, especially in the legislature. So she started to take conservative news channels and conservative voices and translate them into Korea on her YouTube. And she got 1 million followers, and she was changing the entire country. And so they came, and guess what they did? They shut her down. Because a lie can't survive in the presence of truth. They had to control the narrative. The previous president was under siege, and he saw what was happening. He called for martial law. You haven't followed this in the news, but he was promptly arrested. So was the first lady. They put him in prison like they've done with Bolsonaro in Brazil, like they've done in Venezuela. These tyrants don't want anyone contending for their power. They don't care about truth. And they put that president in jail. And Mina, the organization was booming, and the two that I attended, she had used me and translated my messages. And when she came to the church and asked if I'd ever go to Korea, and I'd met her for the first time, what I intended to say when she asked me if I'd ever want to go to Korea, what I intended to say was no. But what came out was, yeah, sure. And then she held me to my commitment, and I went over, and I was blown away by it. And I told Charlie, I said, what's happening over there? And Mina, and so Mikey really was moved by Mina and set up a meeting. And everyone who meets with Charlie or Turning Point wants something from them. Mina came in and said, how can I serve you? She had done it all on her own. She'd raised her own support. She was just wanting maybe if Charlie would ever want to come out. She asked me, and I said, Mina, that's a heavy lift. Charlie doesn't leave the United States. He loves America, and he's committed to all of it. I said he went to England for the Cambridge and Oxford debates because they kept saying he was scared. He's not scared, he just didn't want to go to England. Who would? By the way, last service, an Englishman by the name of Paul, a really cool accent. He had walked away from the church 25 years ago in England. He said, Charlie was the first person I ever met that said, God loves you. And he said, I came here today. He just received Christ in my office a few moments ago. And I said, Mina, he went to England to do the debates, and he was set up. I mean, it was just a setup. And Charlie, the brightest of all of England, they were just petulant, bratty kids is what they were, and he mopped the floor with them. And I said, Mina, I just don't think he'll go to Korea. And I just lack faith. She goes, Pastor Rob, I'll pray. I go, you pray, I'll ask. But don't get your hopes up. I mean, I had to add that. And Charlie goes, yeah, I'll do that. I'm like, I go, Mina, he'll probably change his mind. She goes, I'll pray. He didn't change his mind. And he decides to go to Korea. I went over early because Mina wanted me to do some promo work to get the event going. She had me speaking at the largest church in the South in Busan with a man I'd met 2 years earlier, and the year after that we became very close friends. His name is Pastor Cho, largest church in Busan, one of the largest churches in Korea, 15,000 people. And he was an ex Korean Special Forces. He's a beast of a man. His wife is lovely. His 3 kids adore him. And Pastor Son is the only megachurch pastor in all of Korea that kept his doors open during COVID. When he met me, he said, I heard about you. I heard about your church. We took inspiration from you. And I'm like, I love this guy. And he's just fearless. He says, they can take everything from me. We'll worship in the park. They can have it all. But no one is going to stop us from worshiping. And they came after him with lawfare. And it's not like the freedom you have in America, even though we were losing it in the previous administration. They came after him. And I want you to imagine, this is what Korea is like right now. I want you to imagine President Trump being assassinated or put in jail, or Kamala winning after the 4 years of that previous administration, then having her step into office. Can you imagine where we'd all be? Well, that's where they are in Korea right now. Business leaders, Christian business leaders, pastors of the mega churches had all agreed to sponsor. They had made commitments financially to build up Korea. Everything was scheduled to be paid for. She had raised the money to make it happen. Charlie's coming over. He's going to be the keynote speaker. And all of a sudden, this new president that put the other president in jail and the first lady in jail decides to do something that had never been done in the 70-year history of Korea. Not just the 70-year history of Korea. When the imperial Japanese subjected Korea to enslavement, the Japanese didn't even do what this president did. He raided the churches. Who does that? Churches. And if you have any connection to government, let's get to the president and tell him, don't give Korea 15% tariffs, give him 300% tariffs. You mess with the bride of Christ, you're done. And the president's committed to religious freedom. He just needs to know what's happening over there, and I was there. And Pastor Son started a march in the streets of Korea when they put forward what they called the Equity Act, where they were legalizing homosexuality and transgenderism. And he stood, he said, this isn't in the Bible. And he got in the 5 largest cities over 3 million people marching. Do we have the clip of that? Show it, will you? Oh no, you don't have that. That's a Sagaro one. We have the smaller one. Skip that. Hold it. Don't do it yet. I'll show it to you later, but they're marching through. So this new president gets into office, and the first thing he does is he's going to arrest Pastor Son because he's the kingpin. He's causing Christians to realize they need to stand for righteousness. And all the citizens are marching. The pastors are, some marching, but many are hiding. And now the threat comes of imprisonment. And all the business leaders, I remember I got there to Korea, flew from here to Salt Lake to Seoul immediately to Busan. It was a long trip, all Saturday was flying. It was a day that didn't end. And then Sunday I have to preach in the services. And Pastor Son could have been more gracious. It was awesome. And he said, I'm fearful I'm going to be arrested next week. Can I meet with Charlie? I said, yeah, of course you can. Charlie arrived, spent some time with him. It was really good to just have one-on-one time with Charlie. He was so warmly received, and all these business leaders bailed on Mina. All the churches bailed on her. Cowardice. One chairman of a very large Korean company whose name is to be anonymous right now. God knows who he is. I went and met with him. I said, you made a commitment. You have more of a fear of man than you have a fear of God. You need to make good on your commitment. You need to stand. He's the only Christian in his entire dynasty, and he did. And to his credit, unlike the other business leaders, he did send money to support. The churches cowered. Mina still put the event on, and thousands of young people showed up. No adults, because adults were scared. They're more fearful of man than they are of God. No pastors, except for a handful of smaller churches and one megachurch pastor, Pastor Son. And Charlie met with Pastor Son, and I shared with him the story. And the likelihood is he may be arrested on Monday. And Charlie looked at Pastor Son, took a picture with him. He said, let's get that because we're going to use it for the radio broadcast. If they arrest you, I will personally call the Secretary of State. And Pastor Son was comforted, and Charlie meant it. Well, we finished the event. Kids loved Charlie. He called out their low birth rate. He called out their indulgence to materialism. He called the church to account. It was phenomenal, and the young people were cheering. They were all fired up. So was Mina. And then Charlie left to go to Japan to speak to a conservative audience there, led many people to Christ in Japan. And I went home. I landed, and as soon as I landed, about 15 minutes later, the phone buzzes, and it's Chance. It's Pastor Sohn's youngest son. He says, my father's been arrested. They have him in ropes. They're not allowing us to see him until next week, which is going to be Thursday of next week. A pastor tied in ropes. And what are his charges? He dared to endorse a candidate from the pulpit. This is the freest place on earth. The pulpit declares that you can speak truth anytime you want. And listen, they have the same writing for their freedom of speech and freedom of religion. It's not freedom from religion. The first 16 words of the First Amendment read, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. For over 200 years in America, it was the freedom of religion. But then they did what they call the separation clause, and they reversed the meaning of it. It's no longer freedom of religion, it's freedom from religion. You're free to have secular progressivism, but you're not allowed to have religion in public places. That's not what the founders intended. Jefferson did services in the Supreme Court chambers, and he had the Marine Corps band playing. Tell me about a separation of church and state. First Bible printed in America was done by Congress to evangelize the Indians. The first 13 colonies required that any elected official had to have a profession of faith in Jesus Christ. You read the history. Common law comes straight out of the scriptures. Yes, we're a Christian nation, but we're void of Christians. We have a Christian form of government, void of Christians willing to stand or even to understand it. The number one book in the Bible, or the number one book that all the founders quoted was the Bible. And the number one book in the Bible they quoted was Deuteronomy. They needed to figure out civil law. They came up with the three branches of government out of Isaiah. The Lord is our king, our lawgiver, our judge, executive, legislative, judicial branches. They came up with federal, state, county, and local by Jethro saying you need to appoint godly men who are not covetous over thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens. Federal, state, county, local. That's where they came up with it. And they understood the moral law was critical to civil law, because when the moral law was applied to civil law, it'd be the wise restraints that make men free. That's why Adam said only a moral and religious people can govern a republic. Power wants to concentrate. A republic pushes it down to the people. And that's why the sovereign in America, unlike the other 6,000 years of recorded history where everything's an oligarchy, unlike in America, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, do ordain and establish it. We are the sovereign, and elected officials rule by our permission. When the Japanese were defeated by the Americans, and the colonial rule of Imperial Japan was lifted from the nation of Korea, they became a nation in 1948, the same year Israel did. Both were enslaved people, and both were set free and given a land. They split the land, and all of a sudden, the communists came down. The North Koreans and the Chinese, and they came down and they invaded the South, wanting to make it all communist. Americans who had fought in bloody wars, especially in the end, in the Battle of Okinawa, had seen horrific things by the Japanese, were now called back into war against the Chinese. How quickly things turn. It was Chiang Kai-shek, and now you have Mao Zedong. You had a nation invading another. Korea was the poorest nation on the face of the earth. They had in the 400th percentile of GDP, in the lowest of nations. Of course, Americans come in. We invade in Incheon. Instead of going up north, we came in and split them in the middle. Brilliant tactician, MacArthur. Matter of fact, in Incheon, a friend of mine who owns a baseball team there in Incheon, the team's called the Landers, in honor of Americans landing there. We lost 36,224 U.S. military personnel that established the 38th parallel and saved South Korea. The North got all the farmland. The South got all the rocky coastlines, but the South got freedom. You just look at a picture of the Korean Peninsula at night. The North is dark and destitute, and the South is lit with industry, and it became the Korean miracle. 400 GDP, now they're 8th in the world. And the reason why is because they had a Christian work ethic, and pastors led the effort. They followed our Constitution, followed our amendments. They had the freedom of speech. But look, just like in America, as the conservatives were more concerned with their affluence, their baubles, their trinkets, and they walked away from God, and they were more interested in the gifts than they were of the giver, the freedom began to lose vigilance, and we started to lose it, and we woke up one day and wondered what happened to America, and that's what's happened in Korea. Churches are being raided. The governor of California said that the church is non-essential. Pastor Son said, "You are my hero." I'm looking at him going, "Dude, you're my hero." And he got arrested. And Charlie said, "I need all the information on the charges. I need a background on Pastor Son. I want to get him on my show. I want to get this to the Secretary of State." We put it all together. Chance did it. Charlie was set to broadcast the program on his show. He was going to put feet to it as soon as he finished his first campus event. And a bullet went through his neck. And that voice fell silent. They were scrambling. Pastor Son said, "You tell him I'm praying for his wife, and you tell them I'm praying for Erica and the children, and we stand with you." Mina is scrambling to find $1 million that the churches bailed on and never paid, and the businesses didn't make good on because they were more afraid of man than they were of God. They want the benefits of a righteous nation. They just don't want to fight for it. And if any very wealthy people are looking for a place to put money, I'm serious, I'm not making a joke out of this, especially online. Charlie wanted to see the freedom of Korea. We're about to lose that nation to communism. And you have a contingent of people that are marching in the streets and standing and looking for anyone to support them. If anyone knows elected officials that can get to the top and make sure that they're held accountable and President Lee can't suppress the bride of Christ anymore, do it. Call me, McCoy@godspeak.com. Charlie stood. He was willing to do it. And I'm going to follow through with it. Mina called me and she said, "All the kids are standing." When Charlie went to Oxford and Cambridge, they were outlawing prayer. You'd be arrested for praying in front of an abortion clinic. Praying. They're fearful of prayer, so they're going to suppress it. You get arrested for flying a British flag. They are shutting down what was once in unity with America, a free nation, a democratic nation. And Charlie goes and mops the floor with their elites that couldn't even explain themselves. And he inspired a whole nation. And when he was shot, look what happened in England. Can we show the video? 5 million people took to the streets of England. This is in, let's do Korea now. This is in the streets of Korea. It's not the ones I want to show you, Sagaro, but this is right after Charlie was killed. We love Charlie Kirk. This is happening all over the world.